Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your cell phones and take your seats. The program is starting in 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of ABB America's, Greg Scheu.
Good afternoon, right? Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What a pleasure to be back in front of you. We can have your attention up front. Thank you. We had a great program this morning. What did you think about the keynote this morning? Future of transportation. Wow. Tony Seba really giving us a great look at what's ahead. We have another fantastic program here at lunch talking about the future of energy. Before we start, like we do all our work in ABB, we start with safety. Unless you're brand new to the conference, the ACW right now, I think you're familiar with the numbers. No planned drill. If there is an alarm, it's the real thing. We'll go out of the building. I'll show you in just a minute. Do have that number handy in case anyone needs emergency care or personal assistance. So far, we've been doing pretty good on that. Even after last night's rocking customer celebration, I think everybody got home safely, which was really important. So if you look at the exits, they remain the same. Going out the front of the building or behind us, we go outside and we muster outside. So let me just make a couple comments about our next part of the program. This is a super exciting topic. We're going through an energy revolution. We all see it in our lives. Certainly industry players like ABB, our customers, are working through this as well. And it's a really dynamic topic. And so what we'd like, if you can help keep the noise of clanging and other things to a minimum, we'll turn it over to our panel. Rob Massoudi will be the moderator, and Rob is part of our ABB. I said clanging. I didn't say anything about drums. I guess there's drums too. Is part of our ABB Ability team working on digitalization of our solutions and knows each of the industries quite well. So Rob, I'll turn it over to you, and you can introduce our esteemed panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. I'm really excited to be here, and this is a particularly exciting topic, one that really goes to the core of how we live, work, and play. So we're going to be talking about the future of energy. I've got a great and distinguished panel here. I'm going to take a minute to introduce the panel. I'm going to start with Claudio. Claudio Facchin is the global president of the Power Grids division and a member of ABB's group executive committee. He took up this, his president in January of 2016, and he was the president of Power Systems Division from December of 2013 to 2015. And prior to that, he was the chairman and president of ABB China and responsible for the company's North Asia region since January 2010. Claudio has a degree in industrial engineering from Politecnico di Milano, if I said that right, Claudio. Thank you, Claudio, for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce Chuck McConnell. And Chuck joined the University of Houston Energy Program in 2018 as the executive director for carbon management and energy sustainability. He coordinates the campus-wide effort to address marketplace challenges in the energy industry. And prior to joining UH Energy, Chuck was the executive director of the Energy and Environment Initiative at Rice University. Chuck also served as the Assistant Secretary of Energy in the U.S. Department of Energy from 2011 to 2013. and was responsible for the Office of Fossil Energy Strategic Policy Leadership. Now I'm going to try to say this all in one stream. He led the budget, project management, and research and development of the department's coal, oil and gas, and advanced technologies program. Thank you, Chuck, for joining us. Next, we have Gary Hayes. Gary has served as a Senior Vice President, CIO, leading technology operations at CenterPoint Energy. I think most of you are familiar with CenterPoint Energy. And that's been since 2010, as I understand it. Right. Gary began his career in the energy industry in 1980 with Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company, where he had held various leadership roles before moving to Deloitte Consulting in 1998. He left Deloitte in 2007 to join TXU Energy, where he served as Vice President Business Application until accepting his current position. And Gary holds a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from Oklahoma State University. Thank you, Gary, for joining us. And last but not least, of course, we have Joe. Joe Kava is the Vice President of Global Data Centers for Google. He joined Google in 2008 after having held multiple executive roles in the data center co-location and semiconductor capital equipment industries, if I got that.
Yep.
He is currently responsible for leading a team that manages the end-to-end life cycle of Google's data centers worldwide. That includes energy and location strategy, including the renewable energy portfolio of more than 3.5 gigawatts. It's an astounding number. And this is in wind and solar contracts.
Yep.
And design and engineering, construction management, facility and IT operations, physical security, environmental health, safety and sustainability. Is there something you don't do, Joe, in there?
Not with data
Cover a lot of it. That's great. Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, welcome. I'm really excited to lead this, moderate this panel. And very interesting topic, the future of energy. I mean, we're right, as Greg said, we're right in the midst of an energy revolution. And what we're seeing is that the global demand for safe and reliable energy is going to, I think, grow by more than a quarter by 2040. And that's massive. That's huge on a global level. And what we're seeing, as I think you saw this morning from Tony's discussion, this is going to be led by automation and mobility predominantly. And energy is really becoming more business critical, and I'd say life critical than ever before. And of course, at the same time, we're seeing a lot of changes in the industry begin to occur. We're seeing options for providing, purchasing, and financing energy are proliferating to the point of confusion for the industry. We're also seeing affordable distributed generation and storage technologies, as well as digital technologies that are having dramatic impact in the industry. Major shifts, I think, as Tony said, a major transformation really driven by a lot of technology, affordable technologies coming into play here. What we're observing is that there is a huge demand for locally produced, clean, reliable, safe, cost-effective energy. And this is really pushing the consumers of the energy, and I'm talking about commercial and industrial as well as consumers, but mostly commercial and industrial consumers to really change the relationship with energy, right, from volume to value. We're seeing a shift to energy maneuverability, which is a whole new concept that's also emerging. So this is a movement we call prosumerism, right? The consumer is actually producing their own energy. And while we're on that topic, I'd like to actually start with you, Joe. You're a major prosumer of energy. I mean, 3.5 gigawatts just in renewables, and you can probably expand on that and how many more gigawatts in overall consumption data centers. What's your perspective in terms of the impact from the proliferation of production and consumption of this, this new paradigm on the edge of the network? How do you see this market evolving?
So let me kind of take this from the big picture, from Google's perspective. First, we are an enormous consumer of electricity on all the local grids in which we operate. For perspective, last year we consumed more electricity than the city of San Francisco in the year. So around our global operations. Data centers make up the vast majority of our consumption, more than 80-something% of the total enterprise consumption. For us, it's exceptionally important that we have abundant and varied renewable energy available on the local grids in which we operate. everywhere we operate, we want to be able to purchase 100% renewable energy on the local grids. We want it to be a diverse mixture of renewable energy. We have a stated objective, and since 2007, we've been 100% carbon neutral. We, in 2010, stated our objective to purchase enough renewable energy to match our global load. And to that end, we have signed over 38 renewable energy contract commitments. These are long-term power purchase agreements that make up over 3.5 gigawatts, as you mentioned. We help developers to produce more renewable energy through the certainty of the financial constructs of these power purchase agreements. But we've kind of upped the ante. We, last year, stated that in addition to purchasing just 100% renewable energy, we want to source 100% renewable energy at all of our regions around the world 24/7. With the intermittency of renewables, you can imagine the challenge that that brings. So we're taking kind of a three-pronged approach. First, we're continuing to just buy renewable energy directly from the producers. That is the best way to go about that today. The energy companies are the experts in this field. We want to work with them. Second, we're kind of minimizing our load, if you will. We're using advanced AI technologies to reduce the amount of energy consumption needed and make the most use of the energy consumption 24 hours a day. And we're investing in new technologies, energy storage coupled with renewable energy. Maybe moving the load or matching the demand to the availability of these renewables 24/7. And then lastly, we're exercising our influence on policymakers so that we can address the policy aspects that sometimes prevent us from achieving our stated objective. So that's kind of our big picture perspective.
Thank you, Joe. So what do you see as your need now going forward as you evolve your infrastructure, your capabilities, and also your production capacity?
Well, you know, our footprint is growing dramatically. We currently operate 18 global campuses in four continents. So in the Americas, North and South America, that's the bulk of the data centers. But we have data centers across Asia and multiple data centers across Europe as well. And these are large campuses. They're not a single building. These are hundreds of acre campuses with many, many buildings on them. And so our demand is continuing to grow. And frankly, as I said, we're committed to maintaining 100% renewable. So we need more diversity on the grid, and we need to help developers achieve that. You know, we really want to advance the movement of moving the U.S. and the world towards a carbon-free future.
Thank you, Joe. So on the topic of diversity on the grid, Gary, what we're seeing is that a lot of that load is not really being brought onto the grid. How are the utility companies and such as CenterPoint are positioning to address that need for base load into the consumers?
I'll hit on a couple of things. First of all, you heard me introduced as over technology operations. So transformation starts with the change in thinking. The Technology Operations Group is the convergence of IT/OT plus the convergence of our market transactions. As you know, Texas in a competitive market, we transact about 3 billion or so transactions just like an ATM. So our organization really has changed its focus from just being IT to bringing together the OT functions, and now anything that's transactional within that marketplace folds underneath our requirements. So as I look at that, I think one of the key things is we look to move from an energy grid to an energy internet. So an interesting twist on those also, in the fact that I'll go back in time, and most of you look like you'll understand this. I apologize for that, but we bought those dot matrix printers with those old Apple IIe's, and we had to connect them, and the next 3 hours we spent time on the phone talking to somebody trying to make it work, right? Well, our consumers, as they move down forward in the future, they want their life as a service. Everything's as a service now. So I want my life as a service. I want my energy included in that. And in that, they want the plug-and-play capability that we have. A Bluetooth connects today with ease. A printer connects with ease. Why can't I connect solar? Why can't I connect my battery? Why can't I connect these things with ease? And oh, by the way, I don't even want to mess with it. I want somebody, Google is a good example of those kind of things that have introduced that concept. I want somebody else to take care of that. So how does our role really start to change in that changing environment? We could talk a lot about batteries, we could talk about storage, we could talk about wind, we could talk about blockchain. All of those are the buzzwords that we kind of could throw out there. What I want you really to think about is the movement that we're going to make from continuing our effort as an infrastructure provider. Even if you look at the wireline carriers and the change that happened, that infrastructure still looks to expand. Somebody has to take care of it, it has to be maintained. But that entrance into new markets and opening of new marketplaces, think what the internet itself has opened up in terms of markets. Think what the energy internet market may look like in the exchange of power and transactions between peer-to-peer, whether that's industrial or whether that's actually a residential component. Think about how I may want my life, as I mentioned, managed through an energy management service provider. Those things are the things that we could also go into as new entrants. We have the knowledge and the skills in a lot of those spaces to help people across the board, from large-scale commercial to governmental, educational, or even to the residential, understand that. But at the end of the day, we will probably also become the orchestrator. And that's the move to the digital footprint. You know, all of you know this basic deal that to make the cake, you got to have frequency and voltage. And somebody has to be responsible for safe, reliable distribution of that kind of capability across that energy internet. So our skill to take what we know about what we've done for hundreds of years, couple that with the evolution of digital information and the management of digital components, gives us probably the best position to understand how we're going to be that orchestrator in the future. So I think that's how our transformation starts to look to shift. And it's all driven by that need of the customer to want to be able to plug and play in a way that they can be successful.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. And clearly, this is a new infrastructure that needs to be built out, and there's new investment required for the utility companies to do that. And you are a regulated industry. So what I would love to do is maybe bring Chuck into the conversation and talk a little bit about how you see the regulatory environment evolve over time as these needs are occurring both on the prosumer side as well as the utility side for this investment to occur.
Well, it's an interesting question because it really does set the framework for consumers, industries, and expectations. I think everyone knows we want to have reliable power that's affordable, and we want it with lower carbon. That's a given. That's an incredibly difficult challenge, but that is the challenge. I think the challenging part about regulations is that if you look at regulated utilities and the way that they've been in the past rewarded, it's for capital investments. They earn returns and they return that to their shareholders, and that's the business formula that for many years has worked. But much of the marketplace is now called unregulated, which is a bit of a misnomer, actually, I would argue, because it isn't really unregulated, it's regulated in different ways. There's renewable portfolio standards, there's feed-in tariffs, there's all the things that go along with that. But what the policies have done is rewarded the incremental additions of additional capacity into the system for sale. People sell megawatts, they get paid for it, and that's the mechanism that's worked for them. They're not rewarded on the capital investment. And unfortunately, what that's done is it's created a squeeze in the marketplace for baseload capacity that operates 24/7. You could argue that's the old model of coal-fired facilities, or maybe even natural gas facilities, certainly the nuclear industry based on that. You make a large investment, it runs 24/7. when you don't have a capacity market, when you don't have regulations that support capital investments to be made for baseload, you add capacity that isn't always available to consumers. And so you end up in these situations often where you can be overhung with more capacity than you need for the moment that you need it, or not enough when you don't. And we've observed that in Texas, here in ERCOT. We have a unique situation here where our system has seen its reserve margins drop from 17% to below 8% in less than 5 years. And so I'm sure you've all experienced it. Those of you here from Houston have experienced the warnings from energy providers telling you to conserve this afternoon because it's going to be very hot. Those are situations that are part of the policies and part of the regulations that are going to have to address this transformation. Unless we do that, and unless we have market structures set up to encourage the mix of baseload and intermittent, we're going to find ourselves in a pickle. And that's the pickle that everyone's got to keep in mind. Prices are important, the costs are important, but I believe from the very beginning, electricity and the good of the public is served by reliability first.
Yep. Reliable, safe, and affordable energy, right? That's what we're shooting for. So, you know, as Tony mentioned this morning, and I deeply believe in this, having been in this transformational side of the business, technology. This is really a technology-driven transformation, right? Technology across the board, all the way from you know, renewable energy to storage to new types of storage, as well as digital technology. So, Claudio, what is your perspective on a global level as well as local level in terms of what technology is doing to enable and help drive this transformation in the industry, and some of the examples that you've seen in the market?
Yeah, look, well, first of all, locally, I think there is all the expertise we need here. What I can share is the overview that we see being, you know, a global player. And it's first of all, the trends are, which is something that we haven't seen in the past in this industry, in the whole energy transition or revolution, as you call it. It's pretty much the same. So we're in different markets. We're at different stages of this curve, but everyone more or less is on the same curve, and that curve is the, you know, using renewables instead of fossil, the distributed type of footprint rather than centralized, and all of that, in addition to, for instance, new consumers, like Joe was mentioning, a gigawatt worth of demand coming up in a totally different pattern. First of all, you need high reliability, EV that we mentioned, and there was a great panel session this morning about that. All of a sudden creating a different need and a different pattern of demand. So different pattern of sourcing or supplying the energy, different pattern of demand. That adds a lot of complexity. That adds a lot of complexity in the overall system. And you know, you mentioned, Gary, the Internet of Energy. There are visions out there that say, well, we could think about interconnecting the overall globe by 2050. And technology, for that matter, is not on the critical path. What is rather on the critical path is regulatory, is political will, and obviously what we see, once again, globally, the trends going into the greener part of all this. It's there and it's across different speeds, different stages, but it's there. And it's going to continue that way. We're pretty sure about that. Then there are technologies that would support to strengthen the infrastructure that are much needed because of, you know, managing all this complexity. And that goes both on the backbone of you know, strengthening transmission, putting more capacity so that you don't have to redispatch, and then, you know, basically lose the opportunity of delivering that energy where it needs to be consumed. And for that, HVDC technology, but also ultra high voltage on the AC side, power quality in order to deal with intermittency that Joe was mentioning. It is a pretty big challenge nowadays compared to the past of switching on and off 24/7 a coal-fired power plant. And then you have the distributed piece, which it's a new framework where you see microgrid, grid edge technologies, demand response, and putting in battery storage in order to deal with ancillaries services. And in between those two, we need to deal with the digitalization. Because again, the complexity that those two equations require can only be addressed by increasing the digitalization in both on the generation side, on the consumption, but also on the transmission and distribution. And I would add to that it's not just about innovating in terms of technology, but because of the much higher level of complexity that we need to deal. And by the way, we heard it many times during this couple of days, the speed at which all this transition is happening, the changes are coming in. There is a need for stronger collaboration across all the stakeholders, across the parties, starting from obviously technology providers, getting the right input from utilities, from the consumers that have different requirements, and then putting together that with policymakers and regulators to make sure that regulatory environment looks at what is technology capable of doing, not only today and yesterday, but also tomorrow.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you, Claudio. So clearly, technology is really moving at a faster rate than I think the market is ready to absorb and adopt that. And I think one of the questions that has come up is, given this rapid rate of advancement in technology, how and when do companies decide to make this investment in technology? So what are some of the guiding principles that you would share with some of the audience here in terms of how and when to make that investment decision? Maybe we can start with you, Gary. And
I think that the Texas smart grid was probably one of those areas that a good example of that is it really came to discussion at a regulatory level and at a industry level. And I think that partnership, when you look towards that future in a planned effort, and that goes with your consumers also, that sets the stage for the right discussions that you need to have. Fortunately or unfortunately, we also then go on cyclic periods in dealing with rate cases, and they have to be timed, well thought through, and a variety of us are in multiple different states. So that adds to that distance sometimes to what you need to achieve that. So sometimes you have to step back away from that and look at the directions to which the market is moving and changing, the influence of your consumers, and you have to look at those investments that will yield along that pathway without perhaps going to the farthest extremes of that pathway. And I think that's the balance that we always work within to try to achieve that. Achieve it with great discussions with both our regulators at a state, federal, and even local levels, but then plan in a way that we're progressively moving towards that in the natural evolution of our industry.
And Joe?
I totally agree with what you said there, Gary. I think that there's an opportunity for your industry and myself and our industry to partner better. And I'll give you a specific example. For the last year, we've been experimenting using some of our advanced AI algorithms and applying that to about 700 megawatts of our wind power generation. And through training the model with publicly available data, this is weather data and performance data from the wind farms, we were able to achieve about a 20% improvement in the utilization and the usefulness of the output of that wind farm. And basically, we're able to predict 36 hours in advance what the output of the wind farm would be based on estimating and predicting what the wind load is going to be 36 hours in advance. That helps you because then you can better utilize that renewable energy when it's available and maybe you can better balance your other base loads. So I think that there's an opportunity for our industry, which has some expertise in data analytics, working with our power providers, our partners, to further advance, it helps us, it furthers our own objective, and I think it helps your business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And
I think in our state of Texas, we have probably one of the perfect examples of all of the above. We have more wind in Texas than all but 6 countries in the world. And yet, we burn more coal to produce energy in our state by a factor of 2 compared to any other state in the country. So we have an all of the above mix and everything in between with gas and all of the other dynamics. And Rob, when you asked a question about partnerships, I think at our university we've seen and had the demand by energy companies for a carbon management center, because as energy grows, the demand for lower carbon also grows. And so there's this discontinuity that needs to be addressed. The philosophy that we're embracing is it's not a race to deploy renewables. It's a race to lower carbon emissions. And I think if we think about it that way in terms of the way technology can be deployed, it's not as if we're looking to throw oil and gas or coal out with the baby in the bathwater. What we're looking to do is to look at it strategically, look at a city like Houston with everything we do here, including making chemicals and gasoline and everything else that goes on here, and embracing the fact that we do have all of the above. We're a huge maker for this country, and we're not going to change that in the next 2 to 3 years. It's an evolutionary process, and it requires those technologies and the supporting policies to lower emissions. And again, as I said, it's not a race to deploy renewables, it's a race to lower those emissions.
absolutely. And I think as we think about how this industry as a whole is evolving, there's a shift from being a provider of electrons to becoming more of an orchestrator. There's also a shift from consuming electrons in volume to consuming value, which is really leading into an evolution of a new ecosystem, as represented, I think, by this panel here, right? So we have technology, we have regulatory, we have the utilities, we have the prosumers at the end as well with some capabilities. And what links all of this is the digital infrastructure that connects and allows us to transact in between. What we're seeing right now is an emergence of an energy as a service provider. People coming from outside the utility industry, setting up infrastructure on the edge of the network, extending in past the meter, providing those services and then aggregating that demand and beginning to do transactions, what I think we call transactive energy, amongst themselves. I would really like to hear your view on how you see this ecosystem evolving, in particular, your particular roles and needs as this ecosystem evolves, as the need for partnership extends here. And of course, we'd love to definitely hear how the regulatory, what the regulatory perspective is on all this as well. So maybe we can start with the regulators on that front.
Well, I think, as I suggested earlier, in terms of the way markets are structured, it may not be direct regulatory oversight, but in fact, more importantly, how the market is structured. What are you rewarding? What are you incentivizing? And to the point that I made earlier, I think what's being incentivized today is low-cost capital with available megawatts that can be deployed in times where the price is the highest to generate rapid returns on a low investment. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's the way the market's structured, but it's a little bit at cross purposes with much of what we're trying to accomplish in this energy transition. And I think if we recognize that and be able to move market structures to a point where we're rewarding the kind of low carbon energy that's coming into the system, and I say that with a caveat, it doesn't mean necessarily renewables. There are carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies that can be deployed on fossil fuels So again, it's not throwing fossil fuels out the window, but it's recognizing that low carbon energy is what consumers want. Reward that and incentivize the technology development and the deployment of the infrastructure to enable that. That's the trick.
And Claudio, how do you see companies like ABB evolving in this new ecosystem in terms of their relationship across the value chain and the technology and capabilities that we're bringing to market to enable that?
Well, let me come back to Chuck. I really like the way he described it, and the way we also position ourselves, going back also to the question, where do we put our R&D efforts, money, and funds? It's very much, as you were saying, Chuck, it's all of the above. When you look at what we were saying before, the complexity of the whole ecosystem and the speed at which those technologies need to be deployed, it really needs to have a holistic approach, looking at all the different solutions. And what we're doing is actually looking at all the different technologies in order to help regulatory and to help also customers to give the right answer to that equation. And when it comes to us prioritizing from where we want to invest, we have changed also our approach. As ABB, first of all, is we want to help customers, we want to help society to decouple the economic growth from the CO2 and from the carbonization piece. So how do we do that? We do our own efforts, organic, inorganic, but we have introduced in the last few years very much at the center of our strategy the partnership approach. So looking at the technology on the IT side, how do we leverage that with our OT part of the equation? How do we partner with customers to understand how to best collaborate on the planning stage so that we optimize for the customers, the OPEX and the CAPEX? And I think we can do much more going forward. We have very nice examples of that collaboration with customers and partners to develop that technology. What I think we can do much better going forward, it's again to work together with the policymakers, with the regulatory space to develop those with the right priorities. But I really like how he described it. It's all of the above. There is nothing we can kind of discard. It depends on the different situations, and all the components, all the elements can be leveraged, and the target has to be basically decarbonizing, has to be energy efficiency. Everything else falls through.
Secondary, absolutely.
And I'd probably say, Rob, and I agree, I try to simplify as we've looked at this, and you can read all the literature, go to the variety of different things, and how do you distill this down? And I think about it as we're either going to be a provider, a supporter, or partnering with those who do both of those. Because we'll continue probably through the realm of what we do today, because the cost of infrastructure, and there will be infrastructure, as I mentioned, is still there. We have to have all those long-term mechanisms by which we can do that. In the shorter term, people are going to want more. So am I going to be the provider of that, or am I going to support people in the marketplace that do provide that? Or do I need to find partners that I can partner with to do those realms of activities? So I think that's the changing nature. As we have always worked and tried to work with our customers. We work with our partners, but that co-opetition is going to be much more there in the future than in the past.
Yeah, I would fully agree with you. I think when we see transformations like this and a change in the ecosystem, we see sort of from a single company providing the